The sun had long since set on the alien world. The once vibrant red and orange horizon, tinged with streaks of violet from the dying light, had been replaced by the cold, silent expanse of night. Above them, the stars were a distant blur of light, faint against the oppressive blackness that swallowed everything beneath it. There was no comfort to be found in the sky of this place, no familiar constellations, no reassuring light from a distant home. Only the alien world's faintly glowing atmosphere, tinged in hues that had once been beautiful but now only felt ominous. Humanity's expedition had been a daring one. Led by Captain Claire Richardson, a seasoned officer with a reputation for overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles, the mission had begun as a hopeful exploration into the uncharted regions of space. The world they had landed on was named Sera 7, an uninhabited planet at the edge of a distant star system, far from the crowded, bustling human colonies of the core. The planet had shown promise. Scans revealed it to be rich with natural resources, potentially a valuable new addition to humanity's expanding reach across the stars. But something had gone terribly wrong. They had landed in what seemed like a perfect spot, a valley surrounded by rocky cliffs, beneath the protective cover of tall, dense trees. The soil appeared fertile, and there was an abundant supply of water. But the first night had brought strange weather, a violent storm that cracked the sky open with bright, violent flashes of lightning. The shuttle had been damaged in the storm. Then came the second day, and the strange tremors in the ground beneath their feet, aftershocks of an unseen fault line in the world's crust. It wasn't long before they realized that the ground was far more unstable than it seemed. Their equipment was failing. The weather cycles were extreme, unpredictable. The atmosphere was toxic in ways they hadn't prepared for. The biosphere, though lush and teeming with alien flora, was completely alien to human biology. Dangerous creatures lurked just beyond the tree line, creatures whose eyes glowed with eerie intelligence. But the expedition team had no choice but to adapt and survive. There were no rescue ships coming. There were no communications to be had with the rest of the galaxy. This was a world that didn't care if they were human or if they were ready for it. It had made its own rules, and the humans were intruders. Still, that didn't matter. Humanity had always made a way forward, no matter the odds. This was just another challenge, and Claire Richardson would see them through it, no matter the cost. The first few days had been chaotic. After the storm, the team worked to salvage what was left of their shuttle. It was in pieces, the hull cracked and scorched. Still, Claire had ordered the crew to work with everything they had. They found the shuttle's life support systems intact. They used the heat shields to build temporary shelters. They gathered the few remaining rations, established a base of operations, and turned their attention to the planet's hostile environment. They needed to know what they were dealing with. Dr. Marcus Liu, a biologist and the expedition's lead scientist, had been the first to suggest they venture deeper into the planet's wilderness. "There's life here," he'd said. "We just need to find out what it is and if we can utilize it for food, shelter, or medicine." But the wildlife wasn't the kind they were prepared for. On the second day, they encountered the first of many hostile creatures, huge, armored beetles with sharp, serrated pincers. They had attacked without warning, drawn by the smell of the food stores. It had been a close call. One of the junior engineers, Private Leo Sanders, had been injured in the attack. His leg was crushed beneath a rock in the skirmish, and for a moment, the mission had seemed doomed. But it wasn't just the wildlife they had to worry about. The very air on Sera 7 was dangerous to human lungs. It contained trace amounts of methane, ammonia, and other gases that made breathing difficult. The crew had to wear rebreathers constantly, and even then, the toxic air drained their energy. The ground tremors didn't help either. Every time they thought they'd found a safe spot, the ground beneath their feet would begin to shake, reminding them that their footing was always precarious. And then, just when it seemed like they had adapted, they realized they weren't alone. It began subtly, a flicker of movement in the corner of their vision. Strange shapes in the distance, too fast for human eyes to fully register. It wasn't until the fourth day that they realized they were being watched. The alien creatures weren't just predators, they were intelligent, observing the humans from the shadows. They had weapons, tools, and the capacity for strategy. It wasn't just that they were different, it was that they didn't want the humans there. The first encounter with the aliens was a disaster. Claire had sent out a scouting team to collect resources, weapons, and tools to improve their chances of survival. The team had been ambushed by a group of alien beings, tall, spindly figures with sharp, insect-like limbs and eerie, glowing eyes. The creatures attacked from all sides, their weapons capable of disintegrating the metal alloys of their equipment with ease. The humans had no choice but to retreat, leaving behind what they had hoped would be valuable resources. "We're not alone here," Claire said, surveying the damage to their camp as the survivors limped back in. "And they're not happy we're here." The first encounter had been a warning. But it was just the beginning. Over the next several days, the alien presence became more overt. The creatures who Claire and her team began referring to as the Zither began to encircle their camp, striking when they least expected it. The humans would venture out to gather resources, only to find their equipment sabotaged or their supplies stolen. Occasionally, they would see a fleeting shape in the distance, but it was always gone before they could pursue it. For Claire, the mission had shifted from one of exploration to one of survival. Their original objectives to study the planet and its resources had been pushed aside in favor of the most basic imperative: get through each day alive. But Claire Richardson was not the kind of leader who would simply give up. They would survive, no matter what it took. The humans had a way of engineering their way out of problems that no alien race could ever truly understand. They could adapt, innovate, and create solutions in the face of adversity. They weren't simply survivors, they were problem solvers. The Zither, with their superior technology and cunning, had underestimated one thing: humanity's capacity for ingenuity, perseverance, and sheer willpower. It was Dr. Liu, ever the optimist, who came up with the first solution: we need to think like they do. And so, the humans began their counter-strategy. They studied the Zither, their movements, their tactics, their technology. They found patterns in the way they moved, the way they organized. It became clear that the Zither were territorial, their aggression focused on defending their domain. They didn't want the humans on their planet, not because of some inherent evil, but because they saw the humans as invaders. With this in mind, Claire and her team began to turn the tables. They rigged the camp with traps, simple, effective designs using the few materials they had left. They used fire to ward off the creatures, harnessing the planet's natural resources. They built makeshift weapons from the wreckage of their shuttle, crude but effective in small skirmishes. And every time the Zither attacked, they struck back harder. No one had ever dared challenge them like this before. The turning point came when the humans managed to capture one of the Zither during a raid. It was a desperate move, but it worked. They didn't kill the alien, as many of them wanted to, but instead, they used their technology to subdue it and bring it back to the base. They had learned enough about the Zither's physiology and technology to understand that this creature could be the key to understanding their true intentions. Through careful negotiation and some improvisation, the humans were able to communicate with the creature. They learned that the Zither were not just hostile for the sake of it. The planet they had landed on was sacred to them, a place they believed was part of their species' origin. It was a world they had been watching for millennia, and the arrival of the humans was seen as a violation. The Zither had never encountered a race that didn't simply submit to their superior technology and strength. The humans, to their surprise, were fighting back. As the days wore on, the humans adapted further. They learned how to use the Zither's technology against them, using their own weapons and tactics to push them back. They began to engineer devices that could nullify the aliens' most powerful weapons, adapting their technology in ways no one had expected. The Zither, who had initially thought of humanity as little more than a nuisance, began to realize the true nature of their uninvited guests. The humans weren't just invaders, they were a force to be reckoned with. Word of the humans' persistence spread throughout the Zither ranks. The battle had shifted from one of survival to one of dominance. The Zithers' invasion tactics designed to crush any threat were failing in the face of humanity's ingenuity. And as the humans began to gain ground, they made one final statement to the alien species who had thought they could control their world: "You will not push us off this planet. We'll fight, adapt, and survive, no matter what you throw at us." What the Zither didn't know was that humanity's greatest strength was not in its technology or its weapons, it was in its ability to keep going, to keep thinking, to keep fighting. They would show the Zither what humans were truly capable of, not just as conquerors, but as survivors, creators, and pioneers. Sarah 7 would not be a graveyard for humanity. It would be a new beginning, a world where the human spirit would endure, no matter the odds. And so, as the humans prepared for the final confrontation with the Zither, they knew one thing: this would be a fight for survival. But it would also be a fight to prove that humanity, no matter how far from home, could stand toe-to-toe with the might of any alien race and win. The weeks stretched on, and the battle for survival on Sarah 7 became a war of attrition. Every day was a new challenge, another unexpected twist, another fight for their lives, but the humans were adapting. They had learned to live with the harsh conditions of the planet, the toxic atmosphere, the erratic weather, and the unpredictable wildlife. But the Zither had underestimated them. The human spirit, that strange mix of stubbornness and resourcefulness, had proven to be their greatest asset. The Zither, for all their technological superiority and long history of dominance over their own world, were slowly learning that the humans wouldn't simply roll over and die. They would fight, and they would fight to win. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humanity, no matter where it was, would never be treated as inferior. Captain Claire Richardson had known from the very beginning that this wasn't just an exploration mission, it was a test of humanity's ability to stand on its own against the odds, against those who thought they had the right to dominate. And now, as the Zither began to tighten their grip on the humans' last remaining resources, Claire knew the time for defense was over. It was time to take the fight to them. Claire convened a strategy meeting in the heart of their underground shelter, a makeshift command center. The walls were a patchwork of salvaged materials from their damaged shuttle, with power cables snaking through every crevice, lighting up the otherwise dark space. The air was thick with the hum of their life support systems, and the crew moved with purpose despite the exhaustion that clung to them all like a second skin. "All right, we've been playing defense for too long," Claire began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "We can't wait for them to come to us anymore. It's time to take the initiative. We'll show the Zither that we're not here to be pushed around." Dr. Marcus Liu, ever the scientist, was the first to speak. "We've learned their patterns. We've been tracking their movements, their shifts in strategy. We know where their strongholds are, where their supply lines are weak." Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, the head of security, nodded. "We've had small successes in disrupting their operations. A few sabotage missions have proven that their technology can be broken. They rely too much on their superior weapons and underestimate how resourceful we can be when we have to be." Claire smiled grimly, her blue eyes sharp with determination. "Exactly. We've been using their own underestimation of us against them. But now it's time to turn the tide. We've got a week's worth of intel from the latest reconnaissance. I want a strike team ready by tomorrow morning. We're going to hit their supply base and take their weapons." A murmur of approval passed through the room. The plan was dangerous, but the humans had nothing left to lose. The Zither had been relentless, and their resources were dwindling. If they didn't make a decisive move soon, they would be overwhelmed. The expedition had no other choice but to go on the offensive. Over the next few hours, the humans prepared for the most ambitious operation they had ever attempted. They had scavenged enough of the Zither technology to build crude but effective weapons, laser-guided explosives, makeshift grenades, and bladed combat devices from the wreckage of their shuttle. The Zither's energy shields were a problem, but Dr. Liu had devised a way to short-circuit them using a combination of human ingenuity and alien technology. It wasn't perfect, but it would work long enough for them to get close. Claire and her team spent the next several hours preparing for their assault. The adrenaline was starting to kick in now. There was no fear, only the calm focus that came from knowing they were about to make their move, to finally show the Zither the full force of human resolve. They set out just before dawn, using the dense forest as cover to move toward the Zither supply base, located deep within the craggy hills that bordered their camp. The journey was treacherous, with the ground unstable and the ever-present danger of being detected by Zither patrols. Still, the humans were used to danger now. They moved in tight formations, staying silent and keeping their breathing steady. There was no room for error. As they neared the enemy base, they could see the complex, a series of towering structures made of alien materials, shimmering in the faint light of the early morning. The Zither had built their fortifications with brutal efficiency. It was a well-defended position, but the humans had learned their tactics well. They had scouted the weak points, and they knew where to strike. Claire held up her hand, signaling the team to stop. She pulled out a set of small, rugged binoculars and surveyed the area. A few Zither sentries patrolled the perimeter, but there were fewer than usual. That was the break they needed. "Sarah," Claire said softly, turning to the lieutenant. "Get your team ready to take out the sentries quietly. I want to move in and plant the explosives at their power grid. We hit them where it hurts." Sarah nodded and signaled her team. The rest of the group followed the orders immediately, moving into position with military precision. They worked in unison, slipping through the shadows, eliminating the sentries without a sound. By the time Claire and Dr. Liu reached the power grid, the outer defenses had been neutralized. Dr. Liu worked quickly, activating the circuit that would overload the Zither's power systems. This should knock out their shields and disrupt their main power supply for a good hour. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." Claire nodded. "Let's make it count." The final preparations were swift. They planted the remaining explosives around the power grid, setting them to detonate in a few minutes. With their mission all but complete, they began to retreat, slipping through the base and back into the dense cover of the forest. But as they were about to leave the perimeter, they heard the distinct hum of Zither technology powering up. Someone had noticed something was wrong. "Get back!" Claire shouted as the first explosion echoed through the base. The shockwave rattled the trees, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The humans didn't hesitate. They ran, cutting through the underbrush as the Zither base erupted in flames behind them. But the Zither were not so easily beaten. The creatures, now alerted to the breach, began pouring out of their complex, searching for the invaders. Sarah's team engaged them first, holding the line as the humans made their escape. Explosions rang out behind them as the rest of the team sprinted for their extraction point. The Zither had been caught off guard, but they were regrouping quickly. The humans had made their move, and now they had to survive the consequences. As the last of the team reached the extraction point, Claire turned to see the Zither pursuing them in full force. Their figures loomed through the smoke and debris, closing in with terrifying speed. "Move, move!" Claire barked as she initiated the distress signal that would bring their rescue ship back to their position. The final moments before the ship arrived were chaotic, filled with the sounds of gunfire, alien screeches, and the pounding of alien feet. The humans fought desperately, each moment buying them time, each second a testament to their resilience. And then, just as it seemed the Zither would overwhelm them, the rescue ship descended from the clouds. Its landing gear hit the ground with a loud thud, and the doors opened, revealing the soldiers inside. Claire led the last of her team into the ship, and the doors slammed shut just as a blast from a Zither weapon tore into the ground where they had been standing. The ship soared into the sky, carrying the survivors to safety. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since landing on Sarah 7, the humans had a tangible victory. They had shown the Zither that humanity was not to be underestimated. They had taken the fight to them, and they had struck a blow for their survival, proving that no matter what world they found themselves on, humanity would fight for its place in the stars. And as they ascended, Claire looked down at the burning landscape of Sarah 7 below. The war was just beginning. The Zither would come for them again. But this time, humanity had made one thing perfectly clear: they would not go down without a fight. As the rescue ship ascended into the alien sky, Claire Richardson allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her seat, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. They had made it out, for now. The Zither base was burning in the distance, a towering column of smoke rising into the sky. The explosion had worked better than they'd hoped. It had crippled their power grid, disrupted their communications, and even disabled their defensive shields for a time. But she knew better than to think this was the end. The Zither were relentless. They would regroup. They would retaliate. And when they did, the humans would be ready. Captain Claire Richardson looked around the cramped interior of the ship. The crew, though exhausted and battered, was silent but alert. There was no time for celebration yet. The reality of what they had just done was settling in. They had struck a blow against an alien species that had dominated their planet, but they had also made themselves a target. The Zither had now seen humanity's resolve, and they would not let it go unpunished. Dr. Marcus Liu was the first to speak. His face was smeared with dirt and sweat, but there was a spark in his eyes. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "We hit them where it hurt. We've shown them we're not just survivors, we're a threat." Claire nodded slowly, her gaze fixed out the window as the horizon of Sierra 7 grew smaller. The landscape they had fought so fiercely for was fading into the distance, but its echoes remained. "We've shown them our teeth. Now we need to show them our claws." Lieutenant Sarah Brooks, who had been seated near the rear of the ship, wiped blood from a gash across her forehead. She leaned forward, looking at Claire with a mixture of admiration and wariness. "We've poked the bear. I don't know about you, but I think the Zither won't be letting us off the hook that easily. They'll come back harder next time." Claire turned to face her, her expression hardening. "I don't expect them to just roll over. But that's not what we're about. This is only the beginning. They underestimated us once, let's make sure they never make that mistake again." In the cockpit, one of the flight officers, Ensign Noah Reed, adjusted the ship's trajectory, guiding them away from the hostile planet and into the cold emptiness of space. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound for a few moments. Claire watched as the stars slowly became clearer, distant pinpricks of light, untouchable and indifferent. They weren't out of danger yet. Sierra 7 was still a long way from being fully mapped or understood. The Zither had shown they could track the humans, and their advanced technology was not something to be taken lightly. But Claire was no stranger to uncertainty. She had been a soldier long enough to know that every battle, every victory, was just one step in a much larger war. The universe was vast, filled with hostile forces, both known and unknown, and the human race was just beginning to carve out a place for itself in the stars. "We've still got work to do," Claire said, turning back to the crew. "I know you're all tired, but we've only just begun to scratch the surface. We'll need to gather resources, repair the damage we've sustained, and plan our next moves. The Zither won't be the only challenge we face on this planet. We need to understand this world, its dangers, its ecosystems. And we need to make sure we're prepared for whatever comes next." Dr. Liu raised an eyebrow. "We're going to keep going back to that hellhole?" "We don't have a choice," Claire replied firmly. "We need to be able to defend ourselves, to know every inch of that planet. The Zither may have thought they were the only predators on Sierra 7, but we're not going to just roll over. We'll take the fight to them when they come again, but we're also going to learn everything we can about this world and what makes it tick. The more we understand, the better our chances." Sarah gave a tight smile. "I'll take that fight any day. Let's hit them where it hurts again." As the ship cleared the atmosphere of Sierra 7 and drifted into the cold vastness of space, the crew began to take a collective breath. They had made it. But there was no time to rest. Not yet. The Zither would come for them, of that, Claire was certain. And they would be ready. The following days were a blur of activity. The human ship had left Sierra 7's atmosphere and made its way toward the nearest waystation in the system, a small mining colony with limited facilities, but enough to allow the crew to regroup, repair, and prepare. The damaged shuttle had left them with a skeleton crew, and though they'd managed to recover much of their gear from the Zither's base, they were still low on supplies. The mission's objectives had shifted. It was no longer about exploration or resource gathering, it was about survival, pure and simple. The first order of business was to repair their ship. Ensign Reed and the rest of the flight crew worked tirelessly, patching up the damage, recalibrating the communications array, and rerouting power to critical systems. Dr. Liu focused on what they had salvaged from the Zither base, examining the alien technology for any potential use. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew worked to fortify their position, scouting nearby terrain to create secondary defense points in case the Zither tried to strike again. Claire found herself spending more and more time in the command center, poring over maps and tactical plans. Sarah 7 wasn't just a hostile world, it was a world full of mystery. The Zither, though dangerous, weren't the only players on the board. Something in Claire's gut told her there was more to this planet than the Zither's territorial aggression. There were patterns beneath the chaos, and if they could understand them, it would give humanity an advantage. There was a particular anomaly that kept nagging at her. The Zither had been behaving oddly more strategic, more intelligent than Claire had expected. And there were signs, small ones, that suggested the Zither might not be the planet's dominant species. It was subtle, hidden beneath layers of their infrastructure, but Claire had seen it. The planet's biome seemed too adapted to the Zither's presence. Too perfect. Almost as though the world itself was designed to cater to their needs. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. She needed answers. She needed to know what Sarah 7 was hiding. The Zither were only a part of the puzzle, and the more Claire thought about it, the more she became convinced that the real threat, whatever it was still lurking beneath the surface. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden shrill of the communications alarm. Claire stood from her seat and moved toward the control panel. She keyed in the signal, and a voice crackled through the static. "Captain Richardson," came the voice, garbled but unmistakable. "This is Commander Huxley from the Terran fleet. We've received your distress signal. Hold tight. Reinforcements are on their way." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Reinforcements. The fleet was coming. The cavalry was finally on its way. But as the transmission ended, the feeling in her gut only grew stronger. The Zither were one thing, but they weren't the only danger on this planet. And now that the humans had made their mark, it seemed the universe was about to reveal even darker secrets hidden beneath the surface of Sarah 7. The real fight was just beginning. The arrival of reinforcements from the Terran fleet brought an immediate sense of relief to Captain Claire Richardson, though it was tempered by the unsettling realization that the true dangers of Sarah 7 were still out of sight, lurking in the shadows. Commander Huxley's transmission had been brief but clear. The fleet would arrive in a matter of days, and the backup they were sending would provide much-needed firepower and support. But Claire had no illusions. This was only the beginning of a much bigger conflict, one that could have far-reaching consequences for humanity. As the days stretched into weeks, the human crew worked relentlessly to fortify their position and prepare for what was coming. The mining colony, while small, became their new base of operations. It wasn't much, just a series of prefabricated modules and mining equipment scattered across the barren landscape, but it provided them with a modicum of safety and a place to regroup. The Terran fleet's reinforcements, while not yet in orbit, had sent down several dropships with supplies, advanced tech, and additional personnel. The planet's atmosphere was still toxic to most human life, but the colony had been retrofitted to handle the dangers of Sarah 7. Air filters, shielding, and basic defenses were enough to keep them alive. The real challenge now was understanding the planet's true nature, its secrets, and the hidden forces at work beneath the surface. In the meantime, Claire found herself spending more and more time with Dr. Marcus Liu. The scientist had been working tirelessly to analyze the strange signals they'd picked up in their previous scans of the planet. These signals, which seemed to pulse from deep within the planet's crust, had been dismissed by some as natural phenomena, freak anomalies caused by Sarah 7's unstable geology. But Claire wasn't convinced. There was something about them that felt too intentional, too controlled. Have you found anything new? Claire asked, walking into Dr. Lou's makeshift lab. The small space was filled with blinking monitors, cables snaking across the floor, and data pads stacked in neat piles. Lou was hunched over one of the screens, furiously typing away. Not yet, Lou replied, running his hand through his disheveled hair. But these signals, they're definitely not random. We've cross-checked them with the Zither's communication frequencies, and while they don't match, they do have a pattern to them. Almost as if someone or something is trying to communicate. Claire frowned, crossing her arms. Someone or something? You don't think the Zither are using some kind of covert communication network, do you? Lou shook his head. No, I don't think so. The Zither are technologically advanced, but they're not subtle. They broadcast everything. They're like a hammer, blunt and direct. This is different. It's like someone or something is trying to hide the signal, masking its origin. Claire leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. Could it be another species on the planet? Something we haven't encountered yet? Lou looked at her, his eyes intense. That's the question, isn't it? And if it is, then the Zither are either unaware of it or deliberately ignoring it. Either way, it doesn't bode well for us. If there's another intelligence on this planet, we need to find it before the Zither do. Claire nodded, her mind racing. She had known from the beginning that Sarah 7 was no ordinary world. The Zither had fought for dominance here, but there had to be more to it than that. The way the planet had adapted to their presence was almost too perfect. It was as if the very world itself had been designed for them or for someone. The Zither weren't the only threat here. Whatever lay beneath the surface of Sarah 7 had been hiding in plain sight, and now it was time to uncover it. They didn't have much time. The fleet would arrive soon, but Claire knew they needed more than just military might. They needed to understand Sarah 7 in its entirety if they were going to survive the coming storm. The next day, Claire and a small team of her best soldiers set out to investigate the source of the strange signals. They traveled light, with minimal equipment, using the colony's terrain vehicles to cover as much ground as possible. The signals seemed to be emanating from a cave system deep in the planet's largest mountain range, a jagged, desolate landscape that the Zither had ignored during their initial surveys of the planet. The team moved quickly, their minds focused on the task at hand, knowing that the longer they waited, the more time the Zither had to prepare their retaliation. The atmosphere outside the colony was thin and unbreathable, so they wore specialized suits that provided life support, but the terrain was harsh, treacherous cliffs and rocky ravines that made navigation difficult. Still, they pressed on. They had no choice. By the time they reached the foothills of the mountain range, the signals were growing stronger. It was as if the planet itself was calling to them, guiding them to a hidden truth. Claire's instincts told her that they were getting close. The air was heavy with anticipation, and her crew moved with increasing caution, aware that they might be walking into the unknown. Everyone stay sharp, Claire ordered, her voice low and steady over the comms. We're not alone out here. The cave entrance was well hidden, almost as if nature itself had designed it to be concealed. It was tucked into the side of a mountain, shielded by rock formations and overgrown vegetation. As they neared the cave, Claire's sense of unease deepened. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something was wrong. This wasn't just an ordinary cave. There was a palpable energy in the air, a strange hum that seemed to resonate with her very bones. They entered the cave cautiously, weapons at the ready. The walls of the cavern were covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed almost familiar, though Claire couldn't place where she had seen them before. The deeper they ventured, the more the temperature seemed to drop, as if they were descending into the heart of the planet itself. Do you see this? Sarah Brooks, who was leading the group, said, pointing to the wall in front of them. These markings. They're not like anything we've seen from the Zither. Claire studied the symbols closely. They weren't Zither, she was certain of that. They were too elegant, too precise. The design was almost alien, even to her, but there was an undeniable sense of purpose to it. Whoever had left these markings behind had done so with intent. The symbols seemed to be leading them further into the cave, as though they were meant to find something. The group pressed on until they reached a large, circular chamber. At the center of the room was a structure, something that looked like an ancient, ruined machine. It was large, almost organic in its design, with strange metal tendrils that coiled in on themselves like a giant, dormant creature. The hum in the air was louder now, vibrating through the chamber. The machine, if it could be called that, pulsed with energy. "This is it," Claire whispered. "This is what's been sending the signals." They approached the machine, cautiously. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, definitely not Zither technology, and not human either. It seemed older, alien in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. And then, as they reached out to investigate further, the machine began to stir. A low rumble filled the chamber, and the tendrils of metal began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The ground beneath their feet trembled. "Get back!" Claire shouted, but it was too late. The machine released a sudden, deafening sound, and a bright flash of light erupted from its core. It was as if the planet itself was waking up, and everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. Back at the colony, the reinforcements from the Terran fleet were coming in hot. The Zither were already beginning to mobilize, likely aware of the human strike against their base. But what Claire and her team had uncovered in that cave would change the course of the war entirely. The Zither were not the only force vying for control of Sirius 7. There was something far older, far more powerful, beneath the surface. And now, humanity had awakened it.